Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're journeying back to the very dawn of civilization, focusing on Southwest Asia, especially Mesopotamia.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. We'll be using excerpts from the textbook Traditions and Encounters to guide us. Think of it as our trusty time machine.
I like it, a time machine made of knowledge.
Exactly. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover the roots of civilization.
The journey to civilization, it began long before cities even existed. It's pretty mind-blowing to think about.
Before cities. Wow.
Homo sapiens, humans just like us, have walked this earth for an incredible 200,000 years. That's a vast, vast amount of time.
200,000 years. It's almost impossible to grasp, isn't it?
It really is. And for most of that time, we were hunter-gatherers living in small nomadic groups.
So no permanent settlements, no farming, just constantly on the move, following food sources.
Exactly. This period, it's what we call the Paleolithic era, or the Old Stone Age, was a time of immense adaptation and change. Our ancestors developed tools, they learned to control fire, they even created art. It's incredible.
Like cave paintings and things like that.
Precisely. And they weren't alone. They shared the planet with other hominids, like the Neanderthals.
Neanderthals, everyone's heard of them. They're like our evolutionary cousins.
You could say that, yeah. They were stockier, built for colder climates, with that distinct sloping brow and protruding jaw.
Right. You always see them depicted that way.
But here's a fascinating fact. DNA evidence shows that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, we actually interbred.
Wait, really? So we're carrying a bit of Neanderthal DNA within us?
We are. Makes you wonder what traits we might have inherited from them.
That is wild. But despite their adaptations, Neanderthals ultimately vanished, while Homo sapiens thrived.
They did. And one of the biggest turning points in our story was the transition to agriculture. About 12,000 years ago, after the last ice age ended, things started to change dramatically.
That's when humans began cultivating plants and domesticating animals, right?
Exactly. It led to a whole new way of life. People could settle in one place, they had a more stable food supply, and villages started to spring up, which later grew into towns and cities.
It was a complete transformation. It's amazing how that one shift changed the course of human history.
And this transformation wasn't limited to just one region. Agriculture emerged independently all over the world. In Southwest Asia, it was wheat, barley, sheep, and goats.
So different regions, different crops and animals, but the same fundamental shift towards agriculture.
Exactly. In Africa, they cultivated sorghum and yams and domesticated cattle. In East Asia, rice, millet, and pigs were crucial. And in South America, potatoes, maize, and beans became staples.
It's incredible how human ingenuity was flourishing in all these different parts of the world.
It really is. And one of the earliest examples of this agricultural revolution is the settlement of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. Picture a bustling community thriving over 9,000 years ago.
9,000 years ago, that's just...
It wasn't just a simple village. Çatalhöyük was a complex settlement. They had specialized labor, impressive architecture, even evidence of religious rituals.
Wow. So signs of organized society were already starting to emerge.
Exactly.
Right.
And that leads us to a region that became a cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. It's often called the land between the rivers, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates in what's now Iraq.
Mesopotamia. The name itself just sounds ancient and full of history.
It is. And the location between rivers was crucial for the rise of civilizations. Rivers provided water for irrigation, which meant steady food supply. They were also used for transportation and trade.
So they were like the lifeblood of these early societies.
You could say that, yeah. Some scholars even believe that Mesopotamia could be the actual location of the biblical Garden of Eden.
Really? The Garden of Eden. That's a pretty thought-provoking idea.
It is. But what truly sets Mesopotamia apart is its role as one of the first places where we see civilization as we know it.
Okay, so what exactly do we mean by civilization?
It's more than just living in settled communities. Civilizations are complex societies with urban centers, structured governments, specialized labor, social hierarchies, sophisticated religions, and very importantly, writing systems.
So it's a whole package of interconnected factors that make a society complex.
Exactly. And Mesopotamia's timeline for all of this is truly impressive. They had urban centers as early as 4000 BCE, which predates other early civilizations in the Indus Valley, Egypt, even Peru.
So they were really at the forefront of this whole civilization thing.
They were. The early stars of Mesopotamia were the Sumerians. By 5000 BCE, they had established intricate irrigation networks. And by 3000 BCE, This region had the densest population anywhere in the world.
Wow, so they're packing people in. What were these Sumerian cities like?
Think bustling centers of agriculture, textile production, pottery, and metalwork. Their cities were dominated by massive ziggurats, these towering temples dedicated to their pantheon of gods.
Ziggurats, those step pyramids you always see in pictures.
Exactly. The Sumerians also had a highly stratified society with clear distinctions between elites, commoners, and slaves.
So pretty complex social structure already in place. What else made them stand out?
One of their most groundbreaking achievements was the invention of cuneiform writing around 3500 BCE. Imagine scribes meticulously pressing these pointed styluses into wet clay tablets, creating wedge-shaped marks.
Cuneiform. It looks so intricate and, well, ancient. What did they write about?
Everything. They documented economic transactions, epic stories, even their creation myths.
Economic transactions. So they were like keeping records of their business dealing.
They were. Think of those early cuneiform tablets like ancient accounting books. They also had the Enuma Elish, an epic poem dating back to 2000 BCE. It tells their version of the world's creation.
The world's creation. So we're talking about the oldest example of literature. That's pretty amazing.
It is. There's also the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story of a king's quest for immortality, and his encounter with a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the world.
A great flood. That sounds familiar.
Right? It predates the story of Noah by over 1,000 years, which suggests these ancient flood myths might have a common origin.
Wow. Passed down through generations. Fascinating. So we have these Sumerian city-states flourishing. What happens next?
Well, as with many things in history, things get a bit more complicated. Enter Sargon of Akkad, a ruler with grand ambitions.
Ambitious, huh? In what way?
He wasn't content with just a city-state. He wanted an empire. Around 2334 BCE, he started conquering his neighbors, creating the world's first known empire.
The world's first empire builder. That's pretty significant.
It is. Sargon was a skilled military leader and a very clever administrator. He understood the power of taxation.
Taxation. So not just conquering, but figuring out ways to control resources.
Exactly. By taxing goods flowing through his empire, he amassed wealth, making Akkad the most powerful city in the world at that time.
Wow, what a legacy. Did his empire last?
Well, empires built on conquest often face challenges. Rebellions and invasions ultimately brought Sargon's Akkadian Empire to an end around 2150 BCE. But the idea of empire, that had taken root.
So it set the stage for future empires to rise in the region. Who came next? Did they learn from the Akkadians?
The next major player was Hammurabi, who ruled the Babylonian Empire from 1792 to 1750 BCE. Like Sargon, he was focused on centralizing power, establishing a bureaucratic system, and making sure taxes were collected. He stationed deputies throughout his territories to keep things under control. This efficient and predictable form of government became a model for rulers who came after him.
So Hammurabi was more than a conqueror. He was a builder of institutions.
Precisely. And perhaps his most lasting legacy is his famous law code, the Code of Hammurabi. It's one of the most complete legal codes from the ancient world.
A whole legal code. How many laws are we talking about?
It consists of 282 laws, governing all sorts of social interactions.
Wow. 282. That's a lot of laws. What kind of things did they cover?
Everything. Family law, professional contracts, administrative stuff, property rights, theft, personal injury, you name it, they had a law for it.
That's incredibly comprehensive. So it was an attempt to, create order and justice in a complex society.
Exactly. It gives us an incredible window into the social and legal structures of ancient Babylon.
It does make you wonder, though, was it truly just? I mean, the Code of Hammurabi had different punishments for different social classes.
It did. That's a really important point. One of its key principles was lex talionis, the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye. But how this was applied depended very much on your social status.
So if you were a slave and you injured a nobleman, you were probably in a lot more trouble than if it were the other way around.
Exactly. It shows us that even back then, justice wasn't blind. It was closely tied to social hierarchy.
Fascinating. But the story of Mesopotamia doesn't end with Hammurabi, right? What about those Indo-European migrations we talked about earlier?
You're right. One of those groups, the Hittites, they played a major role in shaping Mesopotamia's future. Around 1595 BCE, they came down from Anatolia and conquered the Babylonian Empire. They were fierce warriors known for their mastery of horse-drawn chariots and a revolutionary technology. iron weapons.
Iron weapons. Now that must have changed the game.
Oh, it did. They were the first to really exploit iron, which gave them a huge advantage in warfare. Think about it. Iron weapons were much stronger and more durable than earlier bronze weapons.
So they had a serious technological edge over their rivals. Did they use this advantage to build a vast empire?
They did, and they weren't afraid to go up against powerful enemies. One of the most famous battles, the Battle of Kadesh, pitted the Hittites against the Egyptian Empire led by Ramses II. Imagine thousands of chariots clashing in a massive battle. It was the largest chariot battle ever recorded.
That must have been an epic sight. Who won?
It was a stalemate. Neither side could claim a decisive victory. But it led to something remarkable. The first recorded peace treaty in history.
A peace treaty. That's pretty surprising for a civilization known for its chariot warfare.
It is, but it shows that even in the midst of conflict, diplomacy could sometimes prevail.
So the Hittites were more than just brutal conquerors. They had a diplomatic side too.
Exactly. But while they were making their mark in Anatolia, another empire was on the rise back in Mesopotamia, the Assyrians.
The Assyrians. Now they had a pretty brutal reputation, if I remember correctly.
They did. They were known for their ruthlessness. Their empire, based in the Tigris River Valley, rose to prominence in the 19th century BCE. They were incredibly organized, with standardized army units, horse-drawn chariots, and eventually iron weapons. They also used terror as a tactic to intimidate their enemies.
Not exactly a gentle approach to empire building.
No, they were not known for their mercy, but they did have a lasting impact. At their peak, their empire stretched from Syria and Palestine to Anatolia and even parts of Egypt.
So despite their ruthlessness, they managed to create a vast and powerful empire.
They did, and while they were known for their brutality, they also played an important role in preserving Mesopotamian literature.
Wait, so these ruthless conquerors were also protectors of knowledge?
In a way, yes. They amassed huge libraries filled with cuneiform tablets containing everything from historical records to scientific texts to literary works.
That's an interesting contradiction. So even the most brutal empires can leave behind a legacy of knowledge and culture. It reminds us that history is full of complexities.
It is. But while the Assyrians were building their empire, another group was leaving its mark on the region. The Hebrews.
The Hebrews, we haven't talked about them yet, have we?
Not in detail. Their story is a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the enduring influence of culture and religion. Originally, they were a collection of Semitic-speaking tribes who migrated to Canaan.
Canaan, where's that?
It's a region that overlaps present-day Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Jordan and Syria. It was in Canaan that their story as a unified kingdom began.
Okay, so how did these tribes go from scattered groups to a unified kingdom?
Around 1030 BCE, they united under King Saul, forming the Kingdom of Israel. This kingdom reached its peak under King Solomon, who is famous for building the first temple in Jerusalem.
The first temple. That's a pivotal landmark in Jewish history. What happened after Solomon's reign?
Unfortunately, after Solomon died, the kingdom split into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division would ultimately make them more vulnerable to outside forces.
Oh no, so instead of one strong kingdom, they became two weaker ones. Did this lead to their downfall?
Sadly, yes. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, scattering the 10 tribes who lived there.
Scattered. What happened to them?
They became known as the 10 Lost Tribes. Some were absorbed into other populations, while others simply vanished from the historical record. The southern kingdom of Judah met a similar fate, though not at the hands of the Assyrians.
So who conquered them?
In 612 BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II, conquered Judah. They even destroyed Solomon's temple. This event led to the exile of thousands of Jews to Babylon.
That's a tragic period in Jewish history. What impact did this exile have on them?
It was a traumatic time, no doubt, but it also proved to be a defining one. During their exile, they developed a stronger sense of shared identity, and their religious leaders started compiling their sacred texts. These texts would eventually become the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament.
So the Hebrew Bible, a text that has had such a profound impact on Western civilization, was essentially a product of exile and displacement.
In a way, yes. It became a way for the Jewish people to preserve their heritage and identity in the face of adversity.
It's amazing how, even in such difficult circumstances, they managed to hold on to their traditions and beliefs.
It is, and it speaks to the enduring power of culture and religion. The Hebrew story is just one example of the many ways that ancient Southwest Asian civilizations have shaped our world today.
It's incredible to think about. We've explored the rise and fall of empires, the development of writing, the spread of languages, and the innovations in technology and warfare. It's mind-boggling to consider the sheer scale of human ambition and ingenuity that existed in ancient Southwest Asia. But our deep dive isn't over yet. There's still so much more to uncover.
There's another fascinating group we should talk about before we move on, the Phoenicians. They weren't empire builders like, say, the Assyrians or the Babylonians, but their impact on the ancient world was huge. They were like the shipping tycoons of their time.
Shipping tycoons. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What made them so successful?
Well, they were a Canaanite, Semitic-speaking people who lived along the Mediterranean coast in what's now Lebanon and Syria. Being right on the coast gave them access to the sea, and they became expert sailors and shipbuilders. They built the best ships of their time, really.
So they were masters of the sea lanes. What were they trading?
Pretty much everything you can imagine. Timber, textiles, glass, precious metals. They even had this purple dye made from a special kind of sea snail. It was super valuable, prized by elites all over the Mediterranean world.
Wow, a luxury dye. That's fascinating. Did they have to travel far to get the materials they needed for all this trading?
Oh, yeah. They sailed all over the place, establishing trading posts from Rhodes and Cyprus to Sicily, Sardinia, even Spain and North Africa.
Talk about a global network.
Mhm.
So they really were the ancient world's shipping tycoons. Did they just trade, or did they establish any permanent settlements beyond their homeland?
They did. They founded colonies in many of the places they traded with, spreading their culture and influence. One of their most famous colonies was Carthage in North Africa. It later became a major power in its own right.
Wow. So they weren't just traders, they were colonizers too. That's fascinating. What else makes the Phoenicians stand out in history?
I'd say their most significant contribution wasn't their ships or trading networks, but their alphabet.
Wait a minute, they invented the alphabet, the one we use today.
The very same. Before the Phoenicians came along, writing systems were really complex. They had hundreds of symbols, each representing a word or a syllable. The Phoenicians simplified all that by creating an alphabet with just 22 symbols. Each one represented a consonant sound.
That's brilliant. It seems so simple now, but it must have been revolutionary at the time.
It was. And their alphabet was really adaptable. It was adopted and modified by the Greeks, who added vowels, and from there it spread to the Romans, eventually becoming the basis for most writing systems we use today.
It's incredible to think that something we use every single day, something so fundamental to communication, has its roots in these ancient seafaring traders. Their legacy is right there in every text message we send, every email we write, every book we read. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. It shows how human ingenuity can have a ripple effect across millennia. Speaking of enduring legacies, let's get back to those Indo-European migrations. They really shaped the ancient world, including Southwest Asia.
Right, those migrations that started in the steppes of modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. But how do we even know these migrations happened? We're talking about events that took place thousands of years ago.
It's all about the clues hidden within languages. Linguists who are studying languages across Europe, Southwest Asia, and India started noticing some striking similarities, not just in vocabulary, but also in grammatical structure.
Okay, so what kind of similarities are we talking about?
Well, take the word for father, for example. In English, it's father. In German, it's vater. In Spanish, it's padre. In Greek, it's pater. In Latin, also pater. And in Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language, it's pitar.
Wow, you're right. The resemblance is definitely there. But how does this prove that people migrated?
These similarities are so striking that they suggest all of these languages, despite their differences, came from a single ancestor language. Linguists call it Proto-Indo-European. And based on why these languages are spoken today, they've traced the likely origin of this ancestral language to the steppes of modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia.
So by studying the evolution of language, we can actually track the movement of people across vast distances and huge stretches of time. It's like a linguistic archaeological dig.
Exactly. And what the evidence tells us is that these Indo-European migrations started around 3000 BCE, and they continued for centuries. We're not talking about small groups here either. These were large-scale movements of people, and they brought their cultures, technologies, and ways of life with them to the regions they settled in.
Fascinating to imagine these ancient people migrating across continents. It makes you wonder what they were like. Were they nomadic herders, warriors, farmers? What would drive them to travel such vast distances?
It really varied depending on the specific group in the time period, but there are some common threads. They were pastoral people, skilled in raising livestock. They domesticated the horse, which gave them a big advantage in transportation and warfare. Many of them were also skilled warriors, using bronze and later iron weapons.
Right, like the Hittites, who were pioneers in ironworking.
Exactly. Their mastery of iron, along with those horse-drawn chariots, made them a force to be reckoned with. But it's important to remember that the Hittites were just one group. While they were establishing their kingdom in Anatolia, other Indo-European groups were spreading across Europe and Asia.
So these migrations weren't a one-time event, but a series of waves happening over centuries, each with its own impact.
Precisely. And they had a huge impact on the cultures they encountered.
Yeah.
New languages, new technologies, new ideas, all of it blended with the existing cultures, creating this really dynamic mix of exchange and innovation.
It's amazing to think about the lasting impact of those migrations. It really highlights how interconnected human history is.
It does. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's shift our focus back to Mesopotamia for a moment. We need to talk about the development of metalworking and trade. They were another crucial thread in this whole tapestry of history.
Metalworking and trade. Okay, I'm all ears. It sounds like a recipe for economic prosperity, maybe even the rise of new empires.
It definitely played a role in the shifting balance of power. Remember how important agriculture was to the rise of civilizations? Well, metalworking, especially the development of bronze, took things to a whole new level.
What was so special about bronze? Why was it such a game changer?
Well, bronze is an alloy, a combination of copper and tin. Around 4000 BCE, metalworkers in Southwest Asia figured out how to create this new material, and it revolutionized everything. I mean, everything. Warfare, agriculture, you name it.
I can see how bronze swords and armor would have given those who had them a big advantage in battle. It must have been a huge leap forward in military technology.
Absolutely. Bronze weapons were much stronger and more durable than the earlier stone and copper weapons. It was a huge military advantage. But bronze wasn't just for weapons either. It was also used to make tools like knives and plows, which made farming much more efficient and productive.
So bronze really was a game changer. It impacted both warfare and agriculture in a major way.
It did. And the production of bronze also led to the development of specialized labor. You needed miners to extract the copper and tin, skilled metalworkers to craft the bronze itself, and merchants to trade those finished bronze goods. It wasn't just about the metal, it was about the whole economic system that sprung up around it.
It's fascinating to see how all these different aspects of society, technology, economics, warfare, even agriculture are all intertwined.
They are. And as these early societies developed, those connections only got stronger and more complex.
So we have these burgeoning cities, new technologies, and a growing network of trade. What happens next in this Mesopotamian saga? Are we about to see the rise of another great empire?
Well, as is often the case in history, things don't always move in a straight line. There are ebbs and flows, rises and falls. The empires we've talked about so far, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, they all rose to power, dominated the region for a time, and then eventually declined.
So it's a cycle of rise and fall, of power shifting from one group to another. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I'd say it's that the civilizations of ancient Southwest Asia, they've had a profound and lasting impact on human history. Their innovations, their ideas, their struggles, their triumphs, they're all part of our shared heritage.
A heritage that's definitely worth exploring and understanding. It holds valuable lessons about ourselves, our societies, and the power of the human spirit.
I couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the rich tapestry of human history. Who knows what other amazing discoveries are waiting to be uncovered?
Well said. Until next time, everyone.